Before we move further ahead with our next topic, which is on buffers. So, what is this buffers? Why do we need? What else we have in this buffers is what we are going to discuss in today's session. But before we start, so anyone have any questions, anything to discuss? In previous sessions, we have discussed on what are these action modes, what are this work states thing, and then we have seen how we can locate or identify any elements in Tosca by using these things, and then we have even practiced around those things. So we had seen by using these action modes how we can uh, use these things and like whenever we would want to just say open this browser or just waiting for this some dynamic wait ons that we have applied and validating things by using this verify as action mode and yeah, about entering things we can just use the action mode input. So all this input verify buffer wait on all these four action modes are very clear with everyone. So if you have any questions around any of this, let me know. Right. So I would assume things are clear until this point, and then further ahead of this. So what we have is nothing but the buffers concept. So what is this buffers? Oh, what else we have? Why do we need these buffers? Is what we are going to discuss in our today's session. So what are these buffers? So these buffers are nothing but in programming terms in that language, we have variables, right? Where we could store some value to that, assign some value to that variables, store some values. It could be, for example, if we want to store in one variable a variable a b x y z something and value as 10, 20, 30 or something, or name as Pradeep. So a string where you would want to store into some variable, and then whenever you need this value, so and so value, you would be referring with its variable. So in short, that variable is nothing but the buffers here, where the buffers are used to store the values. Now that values could be any values. So first of all, what values you would uh, require or you would be needing when you are uh, let's say you're automating some of the test case. So when you automate, so any data that is used for your test case, for example, let's say this URL you have, or when you are filling some input some text onto that, so it could be any of those things. If you are passing that values, so those values, instead of keeping or passing or storing within the test step, we could make use of this buffers concept. So let me first create one sample test case on the buffers part, and here how we can create the buffers first of all. So to create the buffers, let us go to these standard modules. Again, go to our standard modules which we have, and in standard modules around this buffers you would find this TBox automation tool, and then this buffer operations, right? So you have this buffer operations over here, and when you see this buffer operations, let me open the description of this. So the description for this is what you will be able to see over here. So for the buffers, you have this four: name to buffer, delete buffer, set, and partial. So what this buffers individually use is what you can see this description over here. And so if you see this set buffer, TBox set buffer is to set or verify the content of the buffer. And then when you would expand further, you would see name of this, and then about the delete buffer, it deletes the buffer, and TBox name to buffer is nothing but uh, it sets the test case name. whatever the test case name is there, if you want to set, if you want to get it, this is how we could get that with the help of the standard module. And TBox partial buffer, it writes a sub part for this particular thing again. So if you give pass these things or use this, by using this we can achieve things. Now here in our test case, so what we want to do is, let's say I want to store a value called 10 into some variable, or a name called Pradeep. I want to store it in some variable or some buffer. Then what we would require or what we need is nothing but this TBox set buffer as the standard module. So what this standard module is used for, if we want to set any of this. So how you would use it, first of all, drag this and drop it onto your test case. Once you drag and drop, you would get that step added into your test case. And now in this test case, you have this step. In this step, you could just give the buffer name and the value. So what buffer names, what are the variables that you would want to create? Depending on that, whatever the name of the buffer is there, you just give it here and the value that you would want it to assign. So why you would need this? As I said again, if we want to use the same repeated value n number of times during our testing, in our test case. So in the same test case, or it could be any other test case following this, if we have anywhere we want a specific value to be used, then we will be setting the buffer. For example, let's say I want to create one buffer called variable. So a value I want to assign or I want to create, then I would give value as 10. So when I give the variable name as a, and in the value place if I give 10, what does this mean? So here I'm trying to create one variable. The variable or the buffer name is nothing but a, and it has a value called 10. So likewise, you could just create the name of the buffer and give the value. So you could create n number of buffers even in your test case. Now, depending on your requirement, you would be creating different buffers. So it completely depends on your requirement where you would be using these buffers and creating it. So here, let's say I want to create a value as 10 and then b value as 20. Like that, I can define it. And whenever now in my test case, at any of the step, if I need value called 20 or if I need value called 10, then I won't be writing there 10 or 20 directly. Instead, I will be referring that value as either A or B, which one I want to use. What is the purpose? Why we have to use this? If we don't use this, what would happen is, for that, if you have to understand. So let's say I want to create one buffer variable or the buffer name called username. And that username, I want to give value as Pradeep at gmail.com. Just assume this ID, user ID is what I'm just giving this username. Now, when I create this set buffer, when I do this, now in my test case, assume, let's say this, you have some login functionality which we have created and the same test case. Let me just take the same test case example and we will try to understand. So I'll just copy paste that same test case, but here with the use or with the help of set buffers, we will try to see what or why exactly we would have to do it. Now here in this test case, if we see, what are we doing? We are just logging into the application, so login functionality. For that we have some steps, some 6 steps, and each step like opening the browser, and then we are just clicking on login and then entering the email ID and then entering the password, and so on. Now you have all these things, right? Now over here in this test case, right, where what all the test data. First of all, what is the test data? So the data that is used for your test case, for your testing, is we call the test data. Now, as per this particular specific test case, what is the test data that is used? Can anyone tell?
The URL we given and
Mhm.
email ID and password also we gave.
Right. So the URL, email ID, and the password. So those are the data that we have used for our testing. Right? Everyone agrees on this, or any doubts you have, any questions, anyone, let me know. So here for our test case, we have used the data like the URL, and we have also used the email ID, and we have also used the password. So these are the data that we have used. Now, for our test case, wherever we need any data, right? Wherever we need any data, instead of keeping, assigning, or writing it into individual step. So now here, if I don't expand, if you don't see, would you all be able to know what all data have we used in this test case? Do we have anywhere any option or quick way to know, analyze, or check what all data is used? And in case if I want to change the data from, let's say, some ABC email ID to XYZ, I want to change it. So as soon as you just come to this particular test case, would you be able to easily figure out where that data is and where you have to change? Do you see that easiness in this approach what we have did?
No.
No. So again, even the data, the email ID, whatever is used, if you want to change it from person 1 to person 2, some email ID, and if it is used at multiple places, not only just one place, but if the same value in the same test case is used at multiple other steps, even if assume, so if it is used here, here, and then if there are total 50 steps, out of 50 steps, at 3 or 4 steps, the email ID is used. And that email ID, so from one user to other user, if you have to change it, you won't know where exactly those changes have to be made, where exactly that email IDs are out of that 50 steps, in which 4 steps that email ID is used. And over there, when you figure it out manually, you would go to that place, and then you would say, okay, instead of ABC, I would just come here and change it to XYZ. So for today, you would just come here, change it to XYZ, and you would change the password, and it would work fine. But now assume you would have so many things in your project, in your workspace, so many test cases, and out of all those things, now after few months or after a year, let's say you are just executing some test case, and while the execution, now the email ID, while you are testing or while you are executing, they would say, okay, use the email ID as def@gmail.com. Then if you have to do that change, now what exactly you would have to do, where exactly you would have to come? After 1 year, would you be able to remember that, okay, the data that I have used might be in this step, here, here? You might easily not be able to figure out. What you would do is you would check whether I have used email ID here. No, okay, not this one. Whether I have used, no, not this one. I've used email ID here. Yes, so I can just come here and then change it to DEF, whatever the email ID I have to change it. Now, is it the only change? You would even not know that. It could be like, apart from this email ID, again the same email value, the XYZ or ABC would still have to be changed or replaced with uh, DEF. So you would have to go through each and every step again and just see where that value is, and then you would have to update it. So if it is just 4 or 5 steps or 10 steps, you could quickly click and see where exactly is. But in real time, you would have so many test cases, so many test steps, and then changing it from one to other, if you have not done it in proper way, right? So your life is going to be very difficult in updating, in maintaining those things. So that is where, if any data part, if we are using it, one, with the help of buffers, we can store the data whatever is required. And why we need to use buffers is, it would make our life easy. It helps in assigning some value to some variable, and then that variable is what we would be referring. Now for example, right, for example, let's say here in this test case, if I want to set any buffer, any data, what I would do is I would right click, search and add test step, and I would say set buffer. TBox set buffer is the module name that I would call, I would use, and then this would be my first or the initial step. Why initial step? Because before I start actual test cases or the actual steps, I would want to define or create some data for my test case. So defining the data or setting the data, you could just write it anything. So create test data for my test case is what I am trying to do it in this step. So what data do I need? Again, you would analyze, you would see according to your requirement, according to your test case. So let's say if you are trying to automate uh, one of the applications, let's say one of the applications, some registration functionality. Let's say you are just testing this registration functionality, and when you try to test the registration functionality of this application, so what exactly you would do? You would launch this application, the URL, and after this, the next step, you would be clicking on this register link. And I would assume now you know how to click on this register link from Tosca. So what exactly you have to do, I would assume you know that. And then after this, so if I want to test the registration functionality of this application manually, what is the next step we are going to do here? Just manual thing. What is the next thing we are going to do?
Click on register and fill the details.
Fill the details. So what is that exactly according to this? What we would do the very first thing? When you say fill the details, so what exactly, like let's say it's a nursery or an LKG one first class student, a student is here, and then he wants to do that registration, and now you are guiding to that person what exactly he has to do, what exactly you would tell him to do now?
Firstly, you should have his personal information like first name, last name. Yeah.
Right. So on this page, after you say, okay, open the application, the person has done that. Click on register link. That person has done that. After click on register link, what is the next step?
We need to
Enter the
scan.
details.
Scan. So that is, you are now telling me the automation. I'm nowhere bother about the automation over here. I'm just I'm uh, looking for testing this website, testing this application. So as part of my testing, if I want to test the registration functionality, what is the first thing that I have to do now? That is what I want to know manually, not automation side. Automation, just keep it aside.
Yeah, I
Automation,
should give the valid
what we
data.
will try to do is whatever the manual thing is required, we will try to automate that. So first thing, what I am trying to understand or know here is what manually we would be doing it. That is what I want to know.
You select gender and give first name,
Select
last
the
name
gender.
in
So
the
that is
field.
what the first
Yes.
thing one would have to do here is selecting the gender. So you could ask, okay, which gender do you want to select, either male or female? So you would ask, just select that radio button, either male or female. Let's say the person wants male radio button, so that it is done. So after selecting that radio male button, let's say, so now this male button, selecting the male button from Tosca, I hope everyone knows on how to select the male radio button from Tosca. Does everyone agree on this, or do you have any questions on how to select the mail radio button from Tosca? I would assume it everyone knows that. And after this mail radio button, what is the next thing I have to do?
First name.
First name. So I have to give the first name into this first name text box field. Now I should be giving, if I want to test this, I should give some first name over here. Now, depending on whatever the requirement is, I would be giving that first name, and then
Last name.
last name, and then selecting the date of birth, this month, this year field, and then email ID, and so on. So during this registration testing, what can we say the test data is? So if we want to create the test data for that test case, what will be the data that we have to use if we are testing that particular thing? Let's say the registration functionality, if we are testing, so what data we would require to uh, do?
Gender, first name, last name.
So you would say gender, and then first name, and then you would require the last name, and likewise the email
Date of
ID, and then date of birth in the day, month, year. Likewise, you would be giving, and whatever the values you would require. So the value. So first name, if I want to enter, let's say Pradeep, I would enter that. Last name, if I want to enter something, I will just enter that. And then email ID, if I want to enter some email ID over there, I would just enter that email ID. And likewise, the setting of buffers or the test data, it completely varies with the test case that you are trying to work on. So if I'm testing the registration functionality of this application, according to this testing, I might require the gender, I might require the first name, last name, date of birth in the day thing, month, year, and then email ID and the company name and then password and so on. So these are the fields that is required. So all those fields, whatever we need, we could set that in this set buffer, and then into this variable buffer name and the value is what we would do it. Once we create this with the help of this TBox set buffer, so along with this we could create any test data. It could be like A, I want to create 10, B, I want to create 20, or the username or the email, first name, last name, email ID, and then password, gender, so on, all different things. Depending on the scenario, yes, we might be using any of those. So what exactly we have to create completely depends on what you are testing, what you want to do. So if I am testing this login functionality over here, so what data do I have to create here? What do you think?
email, password.
Email and password. So I would just come here, I'll say I would require the email ID for my test case, and I would require the password for my test case. Now where this email ID and password is used in my test step, if I see, this is the step where enter email ID, and then if I'm using any of that email ID, let's say I'm passing this ABC as the email ID to my test case. So now this value, I would cut it from here, Control X, cut it from this place, and then assign this value to a buffer name called email, and under that in the value place I will add that value. So I would give this value over here. So I'm assigning abc@gmail.com to one buffer name, to a variable which is email ID. So likewise, password as well. If I'm using it, I will cut it from here and then paste it over here. Whatever password I want to pass, I would just give that value over here. So I'm setting the email ID, setting the password. Once I set the data, whatever I would require, now, wherever this particular value is to be used in your test case, now I know this value has to be used at this place. Correct, everyone? So this particular value has to be used in this place. So in this place, if we have to use this value, you won't be writing directly that abc@gmail.com. Why you won't be writing it? Because later on, if we want to change that email ID to something from ABC to XYZ or something else, we won't be able to quickly do it if it is at multiple places, if it is there, or if we want to change that, update that value. So it is not a best practice or the good approach to pass the data that is required for our test case within the test step, right? That is why we would be creating it as a buffer, the set buffer thing. And then now if we need abc@gmail.com over here, you won't be doing that abc@gmail.com. Instead, what you will be doing is here in this value place, you will write some syntax. Now here, what you want to refer? You want to refer this, or which one? What you want to refer exactly?
abc@gmail.
That value you want. So that value is present
Yes,
into what?
mail
Email
ID.
ID.
Email ID.
Email ID, this variable. So we need this variable to be referred here. So how we can refer that? So if we want to refer a buffer name into our step, we use syntax called curly brace B, nothing but buffer. If you see this curly brace B, the syntax is curly brace B of, and then bracket, square bracket, open and close these things. And for example, they have also given this. So here, according to this, what we have to write here now?
Calling.
Open bracket.
Open bracket, open and then
Email ID.
close, and then close this curly braces. So this is the syntax, and inside this we just have to refer with the buffer name. So what is the buffer
Email
name
ID.
which we want to use here?
Email ID.
Email ID.
Email ID.
Exactly in the same way, you just have to write it. So now when you write this and when you come out of that thing, you will see this coloring thing that is there. So here, now what does this mean? This means at this place, the value is now would be coming from a buffer, curly brace B, from a buffer which has the name called email ID. So as soon as Tosca encounters this particular thing, it will see if there is any set buffer done, if there is any buffers, variables that is created. If the variable is created for this, what is the value? Whatever the value is, that value would be now coming in this place. This is what the buffer is, and why you have to use, because you want it to be placed at one central place, at a common place, so that in case something in future, if we have to change it, update it while we are maintaining, so it would be bit easier for someone to do the change at one place. And then same thing, if this email ID, now wherever we need abc@gmail.com in our test step later on, in all those places, right? In all those places now, we could just use or refer that with this syntax, curly brace B of the buffer name, which is email ID. Now here in this place, I don't need this. So what do we need here? What we have to write in this place?
Curly
Buffer
brace
of
B.
password.
Curly brace B, buffer of the variable name is password.
Password.
So we would just write that password and close the square bracket, close the curly braces. This is the syntax. Once you write this, now at this place, when enter the password is what, if we say, what it would refer is nothing but the buffer of password variable, and into that password buffer variable, what the value is, it will just come that value in this place. That's it. That is what we are doing it now here. our test case is very simple. You would have simple data, but depending on what automation you would do. So here, if you are testing the registration functionality, you would require the first name, the last name, the date of birth, the email ID, the company name. So all this data, or it could be any other functionality when you are testing your set buffer, or the data that is required for your test case would be different. So according to that, you would be using this set buffer to set the data. And if you want to refer it with this syntax called curly brace buffer of the buffer name is what you would be just giving this. So you have to use this syntax if you want to refer to that value. So about the buffers, what this buffer is and why we need. Any questions around this buffers?
There's it mail ID it has highlighted, but it password side it is not showing like highlighted. Why?
This is because of the data type, the password thing. So if you don't want this password, you want this string thing, and here now if you would write that, so you would have that value.
Okay.
One more thing, Pradeep. So whatever the value it might be a number, it might be alphanumeric, anything. It will be stored under string only.
Yes, in Tosca, in the set buffer,
Okay.
the data type is string. So all those things as a string is what it would store.
Okay. Thank you.
And Pradeep, so this buffer could be used within the test case and also in some other test case,
Right.
and also in any test cases in some other folder also, right?
Right.
Or only with under that folder.
Right. So first thing, how we can set the buffer is what we have seen. Now once this particular set buffer is done, and once you have created the variables and the values that you have assigned, all those things once you have done, right? After this, if you right click, select and run in Scratchbook, or run that particular step. Once the buffer is created, if you execute that and if it gets passed, so once this is done, at this moment, now those buffers have created. Now once that buffers have been created, with the buffers with the names whatever you have given, buffer with name, and the values with so and so respective values has been set. So that would be done. Once this is done, so now in our local, in our Tosca, in our local, the buffer with this particular name and having that values would be created into our system, into our local, into our Tosca storage. Now once the buffers are created, where exactly we can see that is, you just have to go to this tools. From the home menu, go to tools. Under this tools, you have something called buffer viewer. Click on this buffer viewer, and then this buffer viewer is a place where you would be able to see the all the buffers, that whatever uh, we have created and its values in the buffer value place. So in my system, all these buffer values have been created. So this is where we are seeing it. But now for you, even when you have created, you will be able to see under this tools in the buffer viewer, that buffer and the values against that would be present. So this is how you will be seeing it. Once you have that buffer in your local machine, in your Tosca, so this is accessible only to you in your local machine, right? And then along with this, now after this, if at any other place, if you would say, okay, I would want here curly brace b password. Along with this, if I say, or if I remove this and if I say curly brace b of let's say I would call a. So here, what does this mean now? I am trying to refer a variable, buffer variable name, which is a, and a, what value it has. If we want to see, so in our test case, I have nowhere used that. I have nowhere set it, but I am trying to use it. So I would be able to use only if it is created in my local machine. So at this point, have we created this one?
Yes,
Yes. If we have created, what is the value for this?
10.
10. So if you just want to see even if it is there or not, if it is created or not, you can search for that in this place. Just search for that A, and then when you search, you would be getting that result. So here somewhere you might see that A and that value as 10. So depending on that, you will have it. Else, if you are using it, if that buffer is created, when you right click over there and translate the value, when you click on this translate the value, whatever that variable, that buffer name is holding that value, you will be able to see that value. So here that buffer is found and it is having that value 10. So at this place, the value would now be passed as 10. Here, if you need that, or if you just try to access some buffer name which is not present, if you use it, now it is there. So now, do we have any value for this buffer?
No.
No. So when you would execute your test case, at this step, it will be failing, saying Tosca is not able to find this buffer name. If something has been created with this, then you will have that value. But you are trying to refer a variable, a buffer, which is not created. And if you are using it, when you execute the test case, the test step, it will fail at that point, saying that buffer is not found. So when you translate for such things, if it is there, you will get it. If it is not there, you will get this error. Buffer was not found. So now again, all these things, it will be present in each and every test case or throughout a different folders or different place, everywhere it is there. When until and unless that buffer is explicitly removed or deleted, or if it is not created in the test case or explicitly deleted or removed, then only you won't be getting that value. But if it is not deleted, if you have just created some buffer over here, and then let's say I'm just creating over here and username is this, and I want to pass that username over here, I can still pass it. But when I'm referring this, now buffer of username, when I'm saying it here, what exactly this would mean? This is referring to the variable which has value called username. Now, what is that username here if I search for? So if you see the username, uh, so do we have that username here? No. Yeah.
Pradeep, Pradeep, this
Yes.
one, Pradeep at
So over
Gmail.
here we have that. Now, when you would execute this test case, this test step, at this place, you will get the value as what value we would get here?
Pradeep at gmail.com.
Pradeep@gmail.com. So you can even see right click translate value. If that buffer is there, you will get that value even. So this is what the value would be passed at this place. If you need that, then use that variable. If you need any other variable, then remove or replace that variable with whatever variable, whatever value you would need it. Any questions?
And Pradeep, is there any chances like having the same buffer name with different values?
With different values, right? So
Yes.
here, uh, let's say you have just created a b, and then you have used like username, and then you have just doing this over
Yeah, even
here.
here you mentioned email ID here, and in another test case also having a email ID,
Yes.
but with a different ID value.
Yeah. So now here as well, let's say this particular thing. Now after all this, like in my next test case, if I'm referring to buffer of username, or in this step itself, somewhere enter username is what my step is. And while I'm entering the username, if I am referring, let's say enter username, if I'm doing here, enter a username and assume if I'm doing this. Now here, if I would refer this username, what exactly would happen? Can anyone tell? When I would run this whole test case, what exactly would happen? What do you think?
Maybe the first value
First
or
value.
alphabetical, something like that.
Second value will come, I think.
Second
And
value.
why second value?
Username override that.
Right. So basically, before you are trying to use that value, whatever is the recent updated value, that value would be applied over here. So when you are using username at this place, it will check what value this variable is holding. What value it would be holding? The very previous one. The very previous one is this. So this value would be now passed to this place. So earlier it was having this value, but it is now overridden with this value. So it will override, and then this it would be the latest value. That latest value would be passed to your referred variable name. Clear?
Yeah. So the buffer viewer also will be showing only one username or
Yes.
two usernames
Only the
buffer.
latest value. That's it.
The right side table.
Yes. Only the latest value it would
Okay.
store.
Okay. Got it. Got it, man.
Yeah. So this is all about the buffer, set buffer, creation of this. Now when I would run this, execute it, just see here, when I would execute this, the test step green, it is passed. And once it is passed, all these four things have been created. Now, if it is a different thing, you would have different, but if it is the same thing, it will now replace. And then you see here, you have the latest value. So the Pradeep at gmail.com is now replaced with XYZ. And whenever after this, if you are now referring to that buffer name, it will give you the latest value only. So again, after the creation of the set buffer, so if you want to delete any of the buffers, if you want to delete, then you use this TBox delete buffer. So what is this TBox delete buffer? Here you just give the buffer name, and then you could delete that buffer itself. So let's say if I am saying here called username, right? I'll just give that username as a buffer name. Now, after I execute this test case, what I'm doing actually in this test case, I'm setting some buffer, and then at the end, I'm also deleting some buffer. So if you see here, I'm setting some buffers. Here as well, I'm setting some buffers. But at the end, I'm deleting one of the buffer. So if that buffer is there, it would be successfully deleted. If that buffer is not there, you won't see that something. But now, so is it deleted or not? If you just search in the buffer viewer, now are you able to find that buffer name?
No.
No. So it is successfully deleted. So if you want to delete any specific buffer name, then we make use of this TBox delete buffer. That would help us to delete the specific individual buffer. But then if you want to delete all the buffers that is created in our local, then what you have to do is just use this TBox delete buffer. That's it. Don't specify or don't mention anything. Just use that module and right click and run. So when you do this, all the local buffers, whatever is created in your system, would be deleted. That is how you would be deleting it. So after the creation, we might require at the end of our test case, okay, since this data is already created, used, and we are done, we are completed with it, let us delete, is what we might also have that requirement. So that is where any specific test case. If you want to create it, and at the end if you want to delete, you could delete it. So setting the buffer, deleting the buffer, and then there is another called TBox name to buffer. So what is this TBox name to buffer? What this module is used for? Anyone? What is this TBox name to buffer module used for? Yes. TBox name to buffer sets the test case
Name as
name
a
to the
value.
given buffer. Sets the name of the test case. So what is the name of our test case here where I'm using it?
TC1.
TC1. So that would now be stored into where you want to store. Under this buffer in the value place, just give your buffer name. Then when I give this, so TC name. So when I would execute this whole test case, right click run, what would happen? Anyone? Can you tell me what would happen?
Test case name should be a TC1 will be stored.
TC name should be storing value called TC1. But since we have
One.
executed that TBox name to buffer this test case from Scratchbook, all the time you would get that test case name as Scratchbook only. But if you want the test case name, which is TC1 here, or if I use this step in this test case, let's say, if I'm using it here in this, if I execute this test case, so what should happen in this place, in this buffer name, what should be stored or hold?
Login
Login function.
Login functionality of the app, this automation, this
function.
particular thing should be stored over here. So this TBox name to buffer is, if you want their test case name to store in some buffer name, then you would use this module. Now, when you execute this from Scratchbook, you will get all the time Scratchbook. But when you execute this test case from the execution list, now what is this execution list? How we can use that is the later part we will understand. But if you execute this same test case now from the execution list and not from the Scratchbook, then you will get in this place, you will see this login functionality of the app. Or here you will see in this place, what you will see in this place here for this buffer name,
TC1.
TC1.
TC1. So that values, the test case name would be coming and sitting here if you execute this whole test case from the execution list and not from the Scratchbook. Okay. So TBox name to buffer is if you want to get the test case name. Delete is to delete any buffer. Set is to set any buffers. Now what is this TBox partial buffer? Again, TBox partial buffer. Wait, let us use this and see what this TBox partial buffer does. Now here, what we will have is you have some buffer value and start and last. And here again, if you would read or see these things, you will see last three are the optional fields, and then first name of the buffer to be used and value to be used. Now here value is nothing but whatever the value you would want. Now let's say TBox partial buffer that I want is my name is Pradeep, let's say. So this one I want, like our value is this. Now from this whole thing, right? From this whole thing, if I just want to extract the partial text of this from this whole statement, the partial could be I just want the name. I just want this and I don't want the rest one. So from the big sentence or this particular thing, if you want to extract the partial of it, then you will use this TBox partial buffer. And then how you can extract, first of all, so you need this particular thing. Now when you need this, what it is asking, whether just to pass the starting index or the end index. So what should be the starting index I should pass here?
In Pradeep,
So starting index is what it is expecting. So what do you think the starting index of that substring would be? What I have to write it here? Let's say if I give this start as 10 and this if I give as 14, start to end, and then store this, the result or the output, in something called as my result, just output or something. So now when I execute this, now what do you think, what would happen?
The alphabets will be showing like index of alphabets.
10 to 14,
no,
and
10
10 to
to
14, 10 to
14, right?
14 is nothing but,
Yeah.
so 10th index is this S, 11, 12, 13, 14. You see, 10 to 14. So here, based on that, it will be storing. So if I want to refer this one, so it will be like my name, this 6 spaces is also the characters, 7, 8, 9, 10 and 11, and then I have to give here 12 as the starting index. So from 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. So 12 to 18 is what I want to store. Now when I give this 12 to 18 is my start to end index, and if I now execute this, upon successful execution, what I'm expecting, that my result should hold a value called Pradeep. So this is how starting to end index, if you give it, you would use it. Else I can just remove this, delete it, disable it. And the last, what is this last? Nothing but from the last, how many characters you want to store. I want to store from the last 7 characters, let's say. I can even directly give only this last. So we don't have to use this combination. It is like last n characters of the string can't be combined with start or end. So which means just from the last 7, from the last 10, from the last 15, like that if I give that many characters, whatever it has in that, it would be stored. So here when I give this 7, from the last 7, whatever is there, that is going to be stored here. I hope it is clear to everyone about this TBox partial buffer, how you can use the start end index or the last one. And whatever the result or the output is, we are storing it into the buffer with the name called whatever the name we would give it here. We could give any buffer names, doesn't matter what we give. Right? So TBox set
Pradeep,
buffer.
why exactly we use this partial buffer?
So if we want to store some dynamic text, so uh, let's say you would have, so you would get some message, welcome, what do you see, like let's say welcome Pradeep or something you would get. Now when you get that welcome Pradeep on a message, let's say, or good evening Pradeep or something, some message on the application is what you would get it. Now you have to validate that partial text, not the whole thing. So if you have to validate the whole thing, what is the action mode that you would be using over there?
Visible.
Action mode.
Exist.
Verify.
Oh, sorry, verify. Sorry, I'm saying
Yes.
something.
So the action modes is either of this, like verified this or so since we want to validate, we will be using action mode as verify, and verify whatever the message. So welcome Pradeep or good evening Pradeep, like that something on the application, we would just scan, locate that element, and we would say action mode verify that particular part and give this whole text. But then we, let's say we don't want this whole message or whole thing, so we might want, if we don't want to validate that, and if we want to just store whatever is coming at that place for that element, then what will be the action mode that we have to use against that element if we want to store in from the application from some place, if we want to
Buffer.
store,
Buffer.
then we will use buffer. So when we use buffer, assume for one of the element you say buffer and then get the value. So when you are buffering and when you are getting the value, what you would get? Good evening, Pradeep. You would get whole thing, right? Like hello Pradeep, hello, good evening Pradeep, something. So now when you get that, you don't want hello, good evening Pradeep. You just want after hello what is there, or after good evening what is there. I just want to extract that part. I just want to store the partial, not the whole thing, not the big thing. Or this is one example, or the other thing would be, so when you are just booking some order something, when you are doing it, so congrats, successfully your order has been placed and the order number is 1234. So this kind of message when you get, what you would do as part of your testing is, one, you would want to verify the whole thing if it is coming or not, that congrats successful message, if it is coming or not, that you would be verifying. Along with that verification, you would also want to store the number part, the order number, order ID, or the delivered something, delivered delivery number, something, the partial of the text is what you might require. So when you would come across that situation or scenario, then only you will be using such things. Now it completely depends on what your requirement is. Based on that requirement, what we have to use. So if the situation or the scenario is you have the whole big thing, assuming you would get here something called as let me just copy paste this, and then here you would get my order number is something. From the application you will get this, right? When you get this, so what you would want to do is, you don't want this whole thing, you just want the number part, or from the last 8 characters, or the last 10 characters, the last some characters I would want to store and say order number from the application into this buffer name is what I would want to store it. Then I will be using or doing it this, and when I run this, now what would happen if I execute this? What is happening after I execute this? So into this buffer variable name, the last 8 characters for this text. Now how do we get this text again? From the application if we want. Again, before this, you will be writing one step to locate that element. Against that element you would use action mode buffer, and then you will store the value. Once you store that value, over here instead of passing this, you can pass curly brace buffer of uh, order stored from application. So here that buffer names as well is what you can pass it. Now what this buffer, how you would get this? Again, from the action mode, when you would say set buffer, and when you would set something from the application, when you would get that value, from that, if you want to extract the partial of this particular thing, then this is where the partial buffer is what you would be using it. So for the very first thing, or the like on the very first day, or when you're learning or knowing more about this topic, I'm sure you might not be able to exactly understand the usage of this partial buffer. So that is where, don't worry about where exactly we would use it and how. So first thing, currently about this topic, you just understand on how to use this. So if you know how to use this, where to use it, that you would come across when you are in real time, when you would test something, and over there when you would come across some situations, some scenarios, only then you will be able to uh, use this. Until that situation encounters, you can still say okay, you don't need this, is what you can assume. But for the learning curve, just try to understand how to use this, where to use later on in your uh, requirement, in your situation when you are testing. Okay, I want these things to happen in this way, this is what I am expecting it to happen, so this is what I would want it to do. So like that, when you would have the clear requirement, then if you are aware of the topics, if you are aware of the concepts, then out of all those, which one suits, fills your requirement, is what you will be able to analyze and understand and do it according to that. But until that time, just don't go too deeper or understand more into that. Just the things about this tbox set, about the buffer thing. So what is this tbox set buffer, delete, name to buffer, partial buffer, and how we can use, that is what I would want you to understand currently. So is it clear to everyone on what is this buffers, how we can use it?
Yes, Pradeep. I have one doubt. What
Yeah.
is the difference between the action mode buffer and this buffer operation, TBox buffer operations? Is there both are
T-
same, right?
so
Storing the
tbox
value.
set buffer, you mean?
Yeah, TBox set buffer and the buffer action mode. Action
Right.
mode buffer
So
is there.
TBox set buffer is used to explicitly, if we want to set any buffers or variables explicitly from our side, depending on our requirement. If we want to create any buffers, then we use this TBox set buffer and we would create it. But action mode buffer is where we use that. So if you see where exactly we would use it, wherever, if we want to retrieve. So here, if we are retrieving the action mode buffer for this element, I just want the value. So for this element, from the application, whatever value is there, that value would be stored. So the action mode buffer is to retrieve the value from the application. But TBox set buffer, what is TBox set buffer used for? If we want to set our own buffers. Clear or no? Yeah.
Yeah, even whatever we taken from the application, the buffer value,
Mm-hmm.
we can reuse it in the next steps. I mean, like next test case or next steps as well, right?
For example,
Those buffer value. For example, if you place an order,
mm-hmm,
then order number we captured here.
where you
Then
would
some other
capture
test
that
case we
order
need to
number
compare.
here in TBox set buffer, you mean, is it?
No, not in the TBox action mode buffer.
Okay, action mode buffer, right?
Yeah, then it will store one that order number in the store. It
Yes,
will store in one value,
yes,
right?
yes.
That same buffer value you can use it in that some other test cases as well.
Yes, you can use that. So for that things, you don't need TBox set buffer. You don't want to set any of your
Yes.
explicit buffers for such scenario. But what if for the
Okay.
registration you want to set the first name? For the registration you want to set the last name. Can you do that with action mode set buffer? With the action mode buffer, can you do that? If you want to pass
No.
for registration testing functionality, if you want to test, the first name field, you want to pass some value. How can you pass that value then? That is where for the test data, if we want to create for our own specific thing, then we use TBox set buffer. And action mode buffer is from the application. If we want to store, we use that. Now after storing, later on what, how, where you use it and all, that is completely your thing. But the difference here in the action mode buffer and the set buffer is set buffer is used to set the buffers whatever we want.